Good evening, everyone. Sorry to interrupt you. It may be too loud, too. We just wanted to take a few minutes. I was going to run through a presentation. It'll take about 5 minutes. It's a lot about, it covers much of the information you're seeing on the boards, but just wanted to give you a quick overview, and then we can get back to talking about individual boards or marking them up. Just briefly, I'm John Howland with KCI Technologies. We're working with the town on the major thoroughfare plan update. Also, you probably have already met Brandon, Liesel, and Hannah in the back. They all have burgundy sweaters or tops on. Somehow I missed the message. I wasn't on that email. But anyway, just briefly, and to make sure we're all on the same page, what is a major thoroughfare plan? If you were here back in August, we talked about a major thoroughfare plan really addressing 4 major things. One is major streets, so your arterials and collectors. Sometimes folks get that a little confused with local streets, but really the difference we try to draw is that the community can get around what are our major streets, what are the arterials that connect us to other towns, what are the collectors that connect our neighborhoods to those arterials, and then local streets is sort of an issue you tackle through the subdivision process or the development process, because you get into really sort of the fine details of somebody's planning efforts. We also address bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as many of you probably have already seen, quite extensive recommendations. And then also safety and traffic operations. So a lot of the even street improvements have to do with safety and traffic operations. And then finally, just in terms of what is a major thoroughfare plan, it's really ultimately to come up with a list of transportation improvements to help achieve the community's vision. So we started back in late June. We had that community meeting back in August, worked on some deficiencies and needs analysis in September, then it had draft recommendations ready to go in October, and here we are today. And so I just want to emphasize that what you're looking at today are draft recommendations. So this is the first stab based on what we heard back in August, plus some of the technical analysis. So this is really a work in progress, and your input is critical. I should also mention all this is on our project website. So if you don't have that, there's a little flyer that'll provide that web address for you. And it includes an interactive map, and it includes those bypass alternatives and an opportunity to indicate your preference or your comments on any of that. So we're here tonight, but also you can go to the project website and get plenty of information and participate that way too. Just briefly from that August public engagement period, we had 40+ people at the workshop, and then also had 2 stakeholder meetings with another 20+ people. Then we had over 5,600 project website visits, as well as 160 map comments and over 300 surveys completed. So really good showing from the community. Some of the things they focused on in terms of goals and objectives was improve traffic operations, maintain the existing roads and sidewalks, and improve access to walking and bicycling. And then if you break that down into roadway priorities and bicycle pedestrian priorities, you can see again intersections and operations is a focus here, and then adding sidewalks on major roads and improving connections between neighborhoods and providing safe routes to schools were areas of emphasis for the bike and ped priorities. And again, there was, you can see over there on the far right, that map indicates all the different comments that were added, whether it has to do with safety or traffic, walking or bicycling or general comments. So just a quick reminder, and you probably don't need a reminder on this, but obviously the town is growing rapidly and is projected to continue to grow rapidly. As a consequence, there's going to be pressure. This, actually I should have mentioned, the boundary here is the urban growth boundary. So it's the town plus the area it expects to grow. And you can see the dark red is the areas that will see the greatest population increase. Conversely, on the other map, the dark green is where you'd see the greatest employment increases. I think something that we've already talked about a number of times around the room is the role and the importance of Mill Creek in shaping what happens in Nolensville. You're at the headwaters of the Mill Creek watershed with all its tributaries, and as a consequence, You get to experience it every day. And we were just talking earlier at the table, because of all the development that's occurred as you go down the watershed through Davidson County, there's a lot of pressure on the headwaters here in terms of flooding and impacts to the creek. Commuting patterns, we talked about this a little bit last time, just to get a sense of where people are going or going to and from. Roughly 4,600 people live in the town or the urban growth boundary, but commute elsewhere for work. And nearly 90% of those folks doing that are commuting to either Davidson or Williamson County. So a lot of pressure on your north and your west thoroughfare system or major street system. And then finally, just a couple of snapshots on level of service. It's just one way to measure your transportation system, really sort of high level, get a sense of the quality. And you can see here, this is the AM peak period. In the morning in 2017, that's when the travel model that we used from the Regional Planning Agency, the Metropolitan Planning Organization. This is what it looks like today. You can see those colors. Green is C or better, which is good, and all the way down to F when you're fully saturated, 100% or more vehicles on that road relative to its capacity. So you can see in 2017, about 48% of the streets operate at level of service D or better, which is a typical standard that communities aim for, level of service D. And then in 2045, you can see about 21 percentage point drop in the total street network operating at level C, level of service D or better. Excuse me. And then in the evening, we just take a quick look at that too, just to make sure that there aren't any great discrepancies. But again, if you think about those commuting patterns and where we saw that growth occurring, again, a lot of pressure on the southern end and the western part of the study area. So again, about a 24 percentage point drop in terms of the street network operating at level of service D or better. So a lot of challenges, a lot of work to be done. And so what I was going to do is just quickly touch on, only 2 more slides, quickly touch on what we have here. Again, these are the draft recommendations, first stab, based on all the comments we received back in August and through September, as well as some of the technical analysis. And I guess one thing I would like to point out is the 2017 Major Thoroughfare Plan, which this is an update to, focused a lot on the arterials, so your major roads, and improvements to those. In 2019, there was a lot of work done within the town about how do you sort of go beyond that and start thinking about the street network, its spacing and its scale. So you start to get these yellow dashed lines in particular, which we're calling development connections, but they would really function as collectors, and they start to build more of a grid for your street network, your major street network, throughout the town. And just as sort of a rule of thumb, it's better to have smaller scaled streets, so let's say 2 or 3 lane, spaced more frequently than it is to have larger scale, sort of 4 to 6 lane roads, spaced less frequently. Just in terms of total vehicle mile lanes available, let's say in a square mile, you'll have more when you have smaller scaled roads spaced more frequently. And what that does then is disperses the traffic and allows, or prevents or avoids major stress on any given roadway or street. So that's sort of the thinking behind building out a street network. And again, in the 2017 focus, let's say on these, mostly on these blue lines, the major arterials. The idea, I think, in 2019 and then now is to try to sort of supplement that and give the network's overall street network, make it more of a grid. We also took a close look in conjunction with a lot of these street recommendations, what could happen in the way of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. A great way for people to get out and make short trips, whether it's to school in the morning or to run an errand in the afternoon, et cetera. So you'll see here, orange dashed lines are proposed side paths. A side path it's like a greenway. It's for bikes and peds. It just happens to be in the road or street right away. A greenway is not in the street right away, usually adjacent to a park or within a park or adjacent to a creek or someplace like that. So you'll see a heavy emphasis on proposed side paths, those orange dashed lines. And the idea is, you know, if you're really trying to provide bicycle and pedestrian facilities for people of all ages and abilities, from little folks to older folks and everyone in between, the key is going to be separation from the vehicle traffic. And a side path like you see around here already in Sunset, Concord Road, et cetera, is a great way to achieve that and really provide that level of safety and comfort for people of all ages and abilities. So that's a key part of that. And then finally, I'll just note here the proposed greenways. There are a lot of proposed greenways. A lot of those would probably be part of future development in the same way those development connections, those yellow dashed street lines are. So that's just something, you know, a lot of communities go ahead and get that on a map, so as development comes in, you can start working with that developer to make that happen. And then finally, an important part of this project, our planning effort, is to look at the 31A bypass alternatives again. I think most folks know back in 2005, TDOT did a study and they recommended, one of their key recommendation was to build a bypass that's shown here as idea number one. It's a two-way, basically starting up at Sunset and then coming south of Clovercroft. And the idea was to just provide some relief to Nolensville Road in that area. We heard, I think it was probably half a dozen or more actually, ideas in August and September. And through sort of a preliminary screening process, we narrowed it down to 4. The 2 that are here, and I'll show you 2 more here in another second. And then there were 2 on the east side. And I just wanted to mention those because we don't show them here, but they were ideas that people proposed. And I think really the key thing, or the key reason those east side ones didn't advance was because their impact potentially on the park, on some of the development here, and also potentially even on some of the school-related traffic, would it exacerbate that? So what we're showing today, and again, this is draft, so feel free to throw out more ideas as needed, but our two-way here, again, the original TDOT 2005 recommendation. Here's a second one. It's also a two-way street, basically following that same TDOT alignment, but then once it gets to Clovercroft, coming down and tying all the way down to Williams Road. So these 2 are sort of more of your major street network type concepts. Then the last 2, or the third and the fourth ideas, are one-way pairs that would be more focused on the historic village itself and trying to make that or create some more options in terms of transportation and travel there. So there's one that you can see here in number 3, and then number 4 follows Kings Lane and tries to work within there. I think we already talked to a number of people or a couple of people that even though we present these as 4 different ideas, it's not that they're mutually exclusive. So you could conceivably take idea 4 and marry it up with either 1 or 2 or vice versa, or any combination. So as you look at those bypass alternatives, if something jumps out and you say, yeah, I really like idea 1, but I think it'd be great to also do idea 4, we'd love to hear that too. So that's our brief presentation. I'd be happy to answer a couple questions, but we have the boards up here so you can look at them more closely. We have a couple of dot exercising votes or exercises to get your thoughts about the future, the scale we were talking about earlier of Nolensville Road from one end to the other, as well as the bypass ideas. So those are those last 2 boards over there. And then we have several of those same boards on the back that if you want to mark up, comment on, we'd love to get those comments too. And again, just one more plug for the website. If for some reason you want to, at your leisure, look at any of this material is on the project website. And again, it's an interactive map, so you can add comments. And the survey has those 2 dot boards, so you can add or participate that way as well. So with that, any immediate questions? If not, we'll go back to the boards and the tables. Yes, sir.
Could you go back to the slide that had the number of people
Sure. Oops, there you go, yeah.
Okay, when you say commute in, you have 1672, does that mean they're basically going through town?
No, they're coming into town to work.
Then what's the 168 that they work within?
Those are people that live in Nolensville and work in Nolensville.
And then we're bringing in another 1600, almost 1700.
And then 45 are heading out.
Do you have any idea what kind of jobs the 1600 are doing?
You know, I don't. I don't know. Hannah, do you have that?
It was a mix of retail and restaurant where there wasn't a ton of variety in the type of work that we were doing. We would come in and there's some healthcare and that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
It'd be good to see on this map because you're showing Nolensville out
Yeah.
and Nolensville commuting within. But it'd be nice to see Rutherford commuting through
Yeah.
and then going either to Williamson or
Okay.
to Nolensville.
Yeah. That's impacting you. Yes. Yeah. We'll do that. We'll include that certainly in the final report. That's a great point. Thank you. Yes, sir.
On examples 1 and 2 that you had up there, if you can bring those up.
Yep.
Okay. Particularly on your ideal 1, are you proposing a 2 or 3-lane road to there, with turn lanes? And how much right-of-way do we require width-wise for a 2 versus a 3-lane road, with good shoulder,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera?
So I may ask Brandon to help me here since he's focusing on this more than I am, but this part of it. But the original TDOT concept was 5 lanes, so 2 lanes in each direction and a center turn lane or median. And I don't know, do you know the right of way on that, Brandon? Around 90 feet. We heard in August and September, those are the early meetings, I think a pretty strong preference to narrow that to maybe 3 lanes. But so anyway, so that's up for discussion, yeah.
If that was a 3-lane road, what is the traffic carrying capacity on that? Like Concord Road doesn't back up
Mm-hmm.
nearly or at all.
Mm-hmm.
That suffice for Nolensville Road traffic to unload our historic district.
Yeah. So there are, on that second to last board there, you'll see traffic volumes sort of existing 2017 and then future 2045. And there's sort of the short answer is it will peel away some of those traffic volumes we're showing there because that's based on, without those volumes, projected volumes are without the bypass. So I think it says like in that gray box, probably around 28,000, I think, vehicles per day. So if you were to add this to the model, and we'll do that in sort of the next phase of this project, if you add this, what will it do to those volumes? And to sort of another rule of thumb sort of, is if it's a 3-lane facility and you want it to operate at a level of service D, which we were talking about as a standard, you're looking at about 17,500 cars a day it could handle. I'm not saying it's going to pull that, but it could handle that. So you start then going, okay, does it make more sense? Would it pull more of that traffic with this concept or that concept, or even 3 and 4? Probably not so much 3 and 4 because they're so focused. But that's sort of the trade-off and questions we have to ask. And the only thing I would say is, part of this is really first to get the community's sort of preference for which of these even seem desirable or feasible, and then we can model it and tell you what we think what's going to happen to the traffic. Yes.
Do that where you had the pairs, the 2-way pairs or whatever in the historic part.
This part?
Yeah, see if that would help unload any of the traffic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Compare that
Yep.
to maybe this alternate bypass.
Yep.
With a deal.
Yeah, we'd like to narrow it down, and not that it's a magic number, but to 2 or 3 concepts, and then test them against each other to see in terms of traffic impacts. But again, I think sort of taking a step back is, just conceptually, is one alignment, give you heartburn or not, is an important first step. I mean, if something looks like, oh my gosh, it's dead on arrival, we never would take that, then there's really no point in modeling it. and trying to understand its traffic impacts. But go, yes, sir.
Another question, on the pairs, what effect would that have on the intersection of Rocky Fork and Old Clovercroft and Nolensville Road?
That's,
Versus maybe this bypass where you completely eliminate that intersection.
yeah. I don't know. Brandon, do you have any thoughts about that in particular?
What we're showing right now is a roundabout at those locations because, as you can tell, it won't be a traditional, four-leg intersection, and roundabouts typically handle that better. You can add a fifth lane to the roundabout much easier. So I think with the roundabouts, it's kind of what we'll look at in these locations here, that geometry. That'll just be part of the modeling, is seeing what size roundabout would work well with the traffic that
With that roundabout, how much right of way would it take just for the roundabout? If you can get that figured into it.
A multi-lane roundabout is roughly 150 to 170 feet in diameter, and then you're looking at sidewalks and area outside there. So you get a sizable circle when you look at a roundabout at an intersection, especially a multi-lane roundabout, which is kind of what we'd expect. At least some lanes would have to be multi-lane.
Yes, sir.
When you all are looking at the bypasses, are you all also, in your recommendations, looking at, for lack of a better word, reality based on cost? Because 1 and 2 are going right through floodplain that are gonna require trusses to raise that highway, which I can't imagine what the expense is. And given that, is it realistic for 1 or 2 to even be options for TDOT? And if it is for TDOT, how many, I mean, we're talking almost 20 years now, how much further versus the 2 paired, which I would assume could be done much more reasonable, and you're not looking at crossing pretty doggone close to cemeteries, and I guess one of them you are.
Yeah,
But,
right here.
yeah. But are you, when you all make your recommendations, are you looking at the actual cost of, and reality of those?
Yes, yeah. So there are probably a half dozen or so variables you look at, whether it's traffic, cost, environmental impacts, cultural, historical impacts. So we'll look at all of those and put down all the sort of the plus and minuses or pros and cons of each.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Maybe right here, sir.
So, you're showing several different ideas for bypasses, which are obviously the north-south solution to the amount of traffic on Nolensville Road. Have you looked at any other alternatives to a bypass to alleviate north-south traffic? As far as more collector roads, development roads, things like that, what kind of impact those would have versus a bypass?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That this isn't functioning in isolation. So, the temptation is to sort of focus in on it and say, okay, what's the trade-off here? But to really understand it, what we'll do based on feedback we get tonight and through the next week or two is, again, sort of maybe hone in on a couple of options, but hone in on them relative to all these other improvements, plus or minus whatever we hear about those as well. So the idea is to really look at your major street system, those arterials and collectors, as a system together. And so, when I was talking about the projected volumes on 31A, yes, I mentioned them relative to the bypass, but they'll also change dramatically with all these different additions. So it's it's a big opportunity, frankly, when you start to think about building out your street network and the impact it can have on a given road like Nolensville. So all those dashed lines will be part of the modeling effort, and should really, sway things quite a bit. Yes, sir.
Go a little further south, that purple line, which was that regional
Yes.
plan, and I think there's a big push to try to get something out of Smyrna across there.
Yes.
Just where does that lay? Is that lay right up on top of the range, the hill range through there?
It comes from the Metropolitan Planning Organization's Regional Transportation Plan. So that was just completed about a year ago, and it's really a very, 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 very fuzzy line, loose line. So it's pretty much, hey, just pull it across. So I wouldn't take the alignment too seriously yet. I know Victor has mentioned that the town is working with several other jurisdictions, the counties, to study that. And so one idea, for example, we just wanted to say, it may not even be this. It may come up here, tie into to York and Williams, come back out over Clovercroft, and really anything in between. It's definitely a moving target at this point. In the regional transportation plan, it's not even within the fiscally constrained plan, so they haven't identified funding for it. It's in their vision part, which is we couldn't even fit this in financially if we wanted to today, but it's worth starting to look at because it will impact a lot of what happens in the town. So it's a good thing to get ahead of that and try to.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So on that particular study, and folks watching at home can hear. So on that particular study, Nolensville is one of 6 public entities that are working on a feasibility study right now on where that line should be. From our perspective, we like the York-Williams Road level of it, not way down south. We like it a little bit higher. But we have a seat on that committee. That committee actually starts in earnest first week of December. That'll be the first time that we're meeting with the engineering consultant that's going to be doing the feasibility study all the way from Smyrna to Franklin. So that's Franklin, Williamson County, Brentwood, Nolensville, Rutherford County, and Smyrna are all participating in that study.
Yes, sir.
Looking at this map, am I right in saying that none of the bypass options are on that map?
They are actually a little hard to see, but these blue dash lines, there's the original TDOT one. And then here's that idea number 2, and then 3 and 4 are, again, sort of concentrated right there in the village.
So it's not an either-or proposition. Ideally, would we be doing both?
In terms of one-way pair and the other?
Regardless of which bypass option was chosen, would you still be doing these major streets?
Yes, 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 yes.
Over what period of time does this happen, do you think?
Oh gosh, many years, many, many years. I mean, a lot of the yellow ones again are going to be development driven. So as development occurs, making those improvements concurrently. And then the other improvements is really, I think we were talking a little bit earlier, I think actually maybe we were. If there are, one of the things we'd love to hear, if there are priority improvements that you see right now, we'd love to capture that today too. So as we get to the end of this plan, there will be recommendations about what would be the priorities in terms of these improvements.
So it's likely that a bypass would help to control traffic better in the early stages?
It can, yes. I think, and Victor, correct me if I'm wrong, looking at that more as a state-funded project, potentially, and that can take a while. So that's a whole nother animal.
Well, one of the comments was the original proposal, number 1 alternative, because it was in the floodplain.
Yeah.
But actually, that was the one that town 6. They brought that to the town in 2006 and said, okay, this is our preferred alternative. And then Bent Creek was developed and some of that right-of-way got consumed. So TDOT's still interested in that alignment if that were to prove to be the best one, or if it were to be modified so that we didn't have to acquire townhomes or houses or things like that. They really don't like to do that.
Oh, you need
Yeah.
Mike back so you can
Yes,
answer. How much with the embedding trail or regional path coming, how much would that affect roads like Kidd, Rocky Fork? Those roads where they need to be improved, just a good 2-lane improvement?
Yeah.
Or change to 3 lanes?
Yeah.
That's something we're looking at doing a lot closer in.
Yeah.
But would we really need to go to 3 lanes if we were gonna get this, regional path to come through? And, I'm thinking that may be moved up quite a bit on the timetable with all these municipalities looking at it.
Well, I guess I'll start, and I think this goes to your comment about sort of the east-west traffic. This will be included in the modeling effort, so we'll get a sense of what kind of impact it will have. I would say generally, and this is just a general observation, not only did we hear sort of a desire to keep the bypass maybe to 3 lanes for a variety of reasons. I think in general, we heard a desire to keep most of the roads, the scale of them, 3 or 5 lanes, smaller. So you'll see in here, and that's up here in the legend, most of the options are either 3 lanes or 2-lane improvement is the orange. So that'd be like maybe widening lanes or shoulders, improving those, making some safety improvements. So in terms of scale of road, it stays pretty focused. In terms of spacing of roads, it's a lot more being proposed at this time. So I don't know if that helps.
I have one more question.
Sure.
The state's getting ready to start working on Nolensville Road in the Davidson County.
Yes. Yes, sir.
The construction will probably start the first phase in 23. How much of an impact, or if you can answer this, how much of an impact is that gonna have on our traffic that's going north now?
Yeah.
Since it's already bottleneck ahead.
Yeah.
Is there any way to predict that?
Not entirely, or not. I can't think of any. I don't have an answer right this second. I would say yes, it's going to obviously have an impact, but that's around the corner. So it's not as though any of these proposed north-south are going to help. Yeah.
It's gonna happen short term.
Yeah.
You're gonna see that
Yeah. Yeah.
pretty quick.
Yeah. So some of these are not going to be able to allay that.
I think our traffic's gonna get worse.
Yeah, I can imagine during that construction period. Yeah. Yes, sir.
We were talking about the north-south on Nolensville. What's the thinking, or where does, for example, Kidd after McFarland going east, I'm thinking about the traffic
Yeah.
heading to I-24.
Right. Right.
What are the choices? And I mean, this came up just the other night because of the developments on Kidd
Yeah.
and McFarland and how that's gonna be handled getting up to Burkett
Mm-hmm.
to get on I-24 with construction traffic and that, because that road, the sides are falling off.
Yeah.
And, 2 cars
Yeah.
can't pass. And so what's our east-looking traffic flow look like?
I think it's a great point in that, even if you were to say, okay, we're, focused on Nolensville and its urban growth boundary, we have these purple lines that are from the regional transportation plan. A casual look at it, it's biased to the west. So if there are, I would say it's not unreasonable to say if we want to, suggest a closer look at some of those east connections to I-24 in particular, we should capture that in this planning effort.
Well, it's closer than I-65.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know why it's been taken off, other than perhaps because it's Davidson County that way, or what's...
I think
don't know
it's-
what the politics of not having
Yeah.
lines going east.
Yeah, I think probably this isn't set in stone by any means. But I mean, again, if you think about just those commuting patterns, where the 90% are either going to Davidson or Williamson, I think that's sort of the force that's driving, I think, a lot of that. But I absolutely agree with you, and I think to the earlier comment about east-west traffic, looking at other opportunities is definitely is worth doing. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Question, no matter which bypass option is taken, the timeline for the beginning of one of those alternatives and the funding source, would it all be state funds? Can we get in line for that project?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this. It would be, let's say, assume it's a state-funded project. It has to get into the Metropolitan Planning Organization's Regional Transportation Plan. And it has to then work its way into what's called the TIP, where TDOT commits to doing it in the funding. And so, a lot of that's just takes time. And I don't know if, Victor, if you have any thoughts about that in terms of a time frame or a window for that.
A little bit about that. So he says it takes time. It takes a long time if you're going to wait on TDOT because there is, I think, $6 billion, that's with a B, $6 billion worth of projects already in the regional transportation plan. So if we were to put it out there and go, okay, we'll add it to the list, well, there's a lot that are already in there. So what typically happens is if you're going to just the mechanics of going through the process, you can expect right off the bat having to do environmental work. That process alone takes a couple of years. Even if the town said, hey, we're going to advance the project, we're going to pay for it, that's about a 2-year process of doing environmental work. Then you do with that a little bit of preliminary engineering. You're probably tacking on another 6 months or so to that piece of it. At that point, with that, you can go to TDOT and say, hey, we've done the preliminary work. We'd like you to start looking at this in the next, say, 5 years, something like that. If TDOT thinks it's a priority, they might do that. It's got to first be in the 30-year funded plan, and then to get into that 5-year, then you'd end up moving up to the TIP, Transportation Infrastructure Project. That's actually a 3-year plan. TDOT at that point might commit some monies to doing some of the work, but most likely it'll end up being the town to say, hey, we still want to advance this, so now we need to go do construction drawings and right-of-way. And that takes a couple of years to get the construction drawings done and can start into your right-of-way process. Right-of-way acquisition itself, depending on how many tracks there are, could take a couple of years. You're going to end up spending, if the town started, if we were ready today to start doing it, we could end up honestly spending 6 to 8 years in doing engineering all the way up through right-of-way acquisition. At that point, handing it over to TDOT and said, okay, go ahead and build it. Hopefully, during that time period, we're getting TDOT on board so that a couple of years, 3 years in advance of us being finished, they have their money allocated and they're ready to start that program. My one major experience was when I was in Spring Hill. They were building Duplex Road. It was about a 5-mile section. It took 16 years to go from start to finish. And the town or the city of Spring Hill did all of the engineering up through construction drawings and right-of-way acquisition, had about probably 10 to 12 million in that project. The state came in and built it in the last 2 years of that project, spent about 20 million in construction. That help answer your question?
But you have to start.
But you got to start. That's the piece. You got to start. Pardon?
The longer you wait, the further back we are.
Absolutely.
So Victor, are we in any position to get any spin-out funds from the president's $1 trillion infrastructure package? Not directed toward any one project, but something that we could get that then would begin these studies for right-of-way acquisition, et cetera?
We don't yet know what all is coming in that $1 trillion package that was signed. TDOT, we were at the Transportation Policy Board MPO meeting yesterday, and TDOT was there, and FHWA were there, and FHWA was very excited the fact that that big bill was passed. It covers a lot of things. It's not just transportation, but it covers a whole lot of other things. But they're very excited about what money is coming. And yes, I think there will be opportunities for us to apply to go after some of those funds, but we don't yet know what the criteria is associated with them.
Getting back to your main man there,
Where'd he go?
get it off his shoulders. All right, we heard in a meeting just the other day that with proposed developments along Nolensville Road, particularly at the Summerlin intersection, that even with the mitigation that's proposed by the developer, the intersection would go to 11 during the daytime, during the higher volumes and such. Taking that into consideration, your bypass, if it dumps out to the south, anywhere short of that, looks like it only makes the situation worse, or is a worthless option to you. So I'd be interested in seeing your comments. What about that?
Yeah, no, it's a very great point. And, I think we've talked about, whether it's these, which again are more locally focused, what does it mean if you get here and you can, get a little more room to maneuver and you're back at the same situation on the other side. And the same holds for, these scenarios. And so that's, again, all this sort of works together. So when we talk about, what is your preferred cross-section for Nolensville Road from one end to the other, that has to work with what concept if you prefer for a bypass, if there is one, so that you're not ending up in a situation where you're just funneling everybody back down into some tight situation. So, yeah, I think it's a great point.
And I think when TDOT looked at that in 2006, it was more about pulling traffic out of the historic area. And so that's why you see a bypass of that general area. As we've gone through this process, that's why idea two is, making more sense now. It's bringing that traffic further down, as you said, more away from dumping it back into the Nolensville Pike. And that along with some of these other improvements outside of the general area, what we're seeing is pulling more traffic away from that middle downtown.
And idea two is, I remember back in the '06 era when we discussed this with you, and that the whole Summerlin idea was in there. A high school which provides more traffic than anybody knows what to do with, and it fails continuously because nobody rides a bus. Then you add on to a Darcy subdivision that's gonna bring in at least, they're saying 200 apartments plus a commercial center, which is a disaster starting at that. It's gonna fail the intersection. So it's like, this bypass is gonna have to account for that. I mean, what are your traffic flow is gonna be going to that high school now? How do we unload the high school better perhaps and such? I mean, all that contributes to this. And then, if you bring in these other Kid Road things, that just dumps more and more traffic on the Summerlin intersection unless it comes through something called Annecy out there, which will be getting all the cut-through traffic. So it looks like your bypass needs to take it past Summerlin intersection and that potential development in there if it's gonna happen. It just doesn't seem to make sense to dump it out there where it just stops again, You wasted all your money, so.
Which is more like idea number two.
Idea two, but just figuring out how to make it wind around from Williams Road. Of course, we don't own that ground south of there. That's in our urban growth boundary, but we can't draw lines on it yet. But it seems like it makes more sense to preserve your whole historic district if you go to the wider range. Otherwise, you're dumping in nothing but heavy traffic into the downtown. It takes in no preservation of things like the Carmichael House, which, it's a historic landmark there. And getting into that cemetery, I'm gonna tell you, I don't think there's anybody that's gonna wanna go for getting into that cemetery. You're gonna literally open up some real bad feelings amongst people here. You better leave that cemetery alone. So, to me, it looks like one or three, or two is certainly more in solving our problem. And by the time we get there, gosh, if it's gonna be 8 or 10 years just to start, everything except idea two is gonna be passe. I mean, this idea one even stops short of a 2-lane bridge out there on Nolensville Road. So you come around from 4 lanes of traffic dumping over 2. That's sort of like the tunnels in Boston, everything kind of converges.
We've already begun to build, two is starting to build already, south of Clovercroft there, with developments that are coming in. We've assured that there is an access road that goes through those developments, and we'll continue to do that as that goes through those developments. So that's going to be primarily built by developers already. So two was the choice, really, it is that section from Clovercroft north back up into Sunset Road there. I think that's where we have to connect with the roundabout.
So let me
That
ask
would be on us.
Let me ask this question to you all. So as either VOC, whenever they've looked at it and talked about it, and John mentioned about the scale of the roads, and we're trying to have them smaller scale, just because that in and of itself helps to kind of slow traffic, and do you really want a highway, going through the middle of town? What about on the north side of Sunset Road? From north going up, how do you feel about that being a bigger road, so that, Joe, as you were talking about, if you had idea number two, that was being able to help divert and collect some traffic from down the south, and they had a way to get all the way up to Sunset, and at Sunset going north, it was a wider, let's say it was a 5-lane up there because of all of the traffic. What are your thoughts on that versus a 3-lane? And
How
we
far
get more
north?
questions around
But
it.
how far north?
Yeah,
All the way-
I
all the
think
way.
you need to go to Kidd Road.
We
Because
go-
you're now making Kidd Road with the 2 new developments that are being proposed, 1,400 houses roughly. You're gonna make Kidd Road a major thoroughfare. So starting right here on Nolensville Road just bottlenecks everything up at Kidd Road intersection. And you're showing, I don't know what the road is opposite of Kidd Road, you're showing it as orange.
Go to your big map.
They need to tie together, and that needs to become a, blue line road too, because they're putting a bypass, down here, the yellow line furthest to the west. And so,
Waller?
Kidd Road's the blue one at the very top.
Yeah.
You need to get the bypass at least to that point, and then some way tie that in with the orange that you're showing.
Right, Britain Lane.
Britain Lane, because you are creating a basically bypass out here that goes through Brentwood, us, and it just makes sense that you could actually have an outer loop, especially if the other loop is being proposed, the purple one on this side, you just sort of tie them all together, so.
Well, with the commercial corridor overlay we have on Nolensville Road, it starts about where this bypass starts, ties back in at Sunset. That's a state project already, or providing Nolensville Road. I mean, in the short term, we didn't get nothing but a center turn lane all the way to Kidd Road. Would be a big help.
Yeah.
Something else you didn't look at, Malkin Lane, if it tied back into Nolensville Road, where Kidd Road comes across, that would get it on over to Waller. Waller would feed right back in then, and either go back down to Concord, or come on back up to where it ties in, where Brentwood's already got a long range. Back closer to what we call Split Log Road.
Right, right.
Up here, yeah. But, for now, if we could get that bypass to Sunset with a center turn lane, till the state got it widened to the 5 lanes in there, and we've laid right away with that overlay on developments going up through there already.
Victor, to answer your question, where I see, and again, trying to keep in mind that the proposed mission statement of Nolensville is one that is to maintain more of an it says agriculture, but there ain't nobody farming except tomato plants around here. Excuse me, Joe, and a couple of head of cattle. But if we did from Kidd Road to Sunset, the 2-lane with a center turn lane the whole way, where people could actually make left turns. And then from Kidd Road north, go ahead and widen out. And what no one ever talks about, we're talking about all the south expansion from Burkett south to Kidd Road. All of that's zone commercial. That's gonna be developed some way or another, and I'm amazed that, and I don't know how much you all have looked at that as that gets developed. I mean, in what, 06 or 08, Home Depot was looking at that property. yeah, and, so we've got to also look at that all of that is gonna go probably commercial, and I would assume, and I may be wrong, that it's gonna be tending to be more big box kinds of activities, or it's just gonna sit and those people are never gonna recoup their money, but I would still like to see less highway from Kid Road down to, Clovercroft, where we can maintain that kind of feel of, okay, we're still that, and put the focus on people on the real beltways, if you will. I grew up in DC, so I think circular, really emphasizing the Waller Road, the Kid to McFarland to fly on around, and really trying to get people to use those arteries going out and around to avoid the congestion on Nolensville Road.
To add to that, I think, if we can see really what the traffic studies and the flow would be like, a 3-lane road going up to at least Kid Road, again, you've got a bridge right there that's 2, so we've got to think about widening that. But that's maybe an affordable option for everybody across the board, because the turn lane is what we don't have. And let me tell you, you can't turn into the 2-way, or if you come out of Ace Hardware, you've got to go north to come south. It's because of the turn lanes, you can't make a left. When one guy stops, man, it just backs on up. It doesn't matter. So maybe a 3-lane up through there, or 2 with a good turn lane in select places, would be something we could get going quicker, because we have those right-of-ways pretty much. We have to watch that creek up there getting close to Kid. But that could tie into a nice 3-lane road bypass the whole town. And we don't have to look at a 5-lane, monster right now. I don't see it. It looks like 3 would probably handle it for most of it.
I would hate to see us look like Franklin Road in Brentwood.
Yeah, exactly.
But to your point, it does make sense to the first phase be a 5-lane road to get you to Sunset. And with all these alternatives, you would start dispersing from Sunset through each development and stuff like that. So you would get the people in, and then you could disperse them a lot quicker, and that would, because all that coming out of Davidson County is just gonna keep developing in the commercial part. So if you can get those people moving into your corridors of your neighborhoods, then they can disperse with your network and stuff. So it does make sense for that section to be a 5-lane road, and then drop down to a 3-lane bypass from there, so.
And that, not just to do a little plug here for this board, but that's what this board is asking. So, if you think about either traveling north or traveling south or traveling north, how does that work? And again, not that everything's connected, if there's a bypass in here, not just this road, how does it also affect your decision?
I still think, based on what he's saying, the bypass needs to start at minimum with Kid Road and then be a 5-lane into Sunset. So that would start, because Kid Road, with being a major thoroughfare now with all the development, then it's gonna tie into other neighborhoods. You start, do I wanna go to my house, or do I wanna get around and get to the south side where I live, or the school, or something like that? So it starts moving that traffic in 2 directions.
Yeah.
And if people don't like the idea of a huge 5-lane right there, we can always do a 4-lane with a center island and strategic turn lanes within that center island, so we have a much more attractive thoroughfare than, say, Franklin Road. Going from Franklin Road coming to, well, a center island with some landscaping in there would look a lot nicer than just a 5-lane flush asphalt.
Again, I think that's what we heard back in August and September, sort of overwhelmingly, was keep the scale manageable.
Good question.
Yes, sir.
One, do we know that, what percentage of the people that travel Nolensville Road through Nolensville actually want to go to Nolensville, or they're going somewhere else? Is it 90% of the people are just passing through, or 50%?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't have the exact percentage right here, but it's, on Nolensville itself, it's predominantly people in the community, going to and from the community.
I'm not quite understanding the answer. People that are just trying to get through the downtown.
Uh-huh.
going to Nolensville. They've got other destinations, and the only way to get there is through Nolensville Road.
Right. And so I guess what I was the way I was trying to answer was that it's primarily people living in we have the urban growth boundary here, the study area. So I don't have the percentage right up with me, so I'm hesitating, but it's not necessarily that the preponderance of traffic is going from one end to the other end without accessing other parts of the community.
Question number 2, and this is more in your territory. With the BOC approving growth at the current rate, and if it's gonna take us 10 years to get the project going, what's that map gonna look like in 10 years?
Well, the one thing about the developments that they're approving is their developments aren't being built out immediately. Those developments have an 8 to 10 year build-out time frame of themselves. So we look at those things too, but those developments are actually paying for these improvements because they're paying the development fees, the traffic impact fees that we're going to turn around and invest back into these major roads.
I guess my point is let's just say we're gonna grow 200% over the current in 10 years. Looking at that, the volume of traffic, I don't know that 3 lanes is gonna help you at all. I'm not sure 5 lanes is gonna help you at all.
Well, that's why we're asking them to look at them as well as the folks doing the zoning to look at those projections and say, okay, well, where is our population? Where are we expected to be with this this area growing the way it's growing? Where is that population? And then is what we're looking at sufficient, or do we need to be looking at something different? So we're trying to take that all into account to develop the appropriate plan.
And I was just going to add to that, in looking at the future traffic projections based on growth projections, you're really looking at probably 3 streets or roads that are going to be under more pressure than the others. And that, of course, is Nolensville, then Clovercroft. And then the third, I would say, is, and probably to a lesser extent, it sort of jumps, but Rocky Fork. So those are probably the 3 where you start to go, can a 3-lane facility really serve the town long term? Certainly Nolensville, that's up for question like we've all been discussing. And then Clovercroft and Rocky Fork, so probably a closer, it's more of, what's your tolerance for congestion? And, I was saying at the very beginning, a lot of communities use level of service D, which is 80% roughly capacity. Traffic moves generally fine. But a lot of communities have been going to E, for example, and can, absorb a little more or tolerate a little more. So those are sort of judgment calls, policy calls, I think, as much as anything else. But I think it's those 3 roads are really the ones that are facing traffic projections.
I'll throw this out too, just for everybody's consideration. We mentioned about how much a 3-lane facility could take as far as traffic. That's in a 24-hour period. But you're not driving on the roads 24 hours. When we get out here at 7 o'clock tonight, it'll be pretty easy to take a left turn out of Town Hall and get to wherever we're going. But at 5:30, it wouldn't, or 6, it wouldn't. So even when we look at it, you kind of peel back to look at those. Well, what does that look like in an AM peak or a PM peak, and those type of things? One of the constraints that we have to consider also is that if you're on a 2-lane road, if you're driving between here and Arrington or here and Triune, and you are south of Williams Road and you're driving to Triune, you don't ever stop, and there could be the same amount of traffic and you wouldn't ever stop because there's no traffic signal until you get to Triune. And it's the intersections that really provide the congestion, because at that point it's not, oh, we can move 17,000 cars a day. It's now you're talking about, well, what can you get through that thing in an hour? What's the maximum you can get through that thing in an hour, because of it's got to cycle and give a little time to every location. Roundabouts do a better job typically than traffic signals in keeping people moving, because you don't have, you're not, even if it's a 2-minute cycle, that means somebody stopped for a minute while the other side is going. In a roundabout, You don't feel that, even though there is some delay there, you don't feel it because everybody's kind of taking turns going through it all at the same time, and so you have steady movement going through. And it just, everybody moves through it. You don't have the delay of the yellows and all reds that occur on those things. So that's another feature that when we look at capacity and how can we move traffic and what are the best intersection configurations. Wow, there's questions all the way around the room, but you in the back y'all two have had your hands up the most, so. All right, so we'll point to him.
Question about the purple down in the south. I think that road's gonna be super important. Is that gonna be a 5-lane? Do they have any sort of idea there?
I want to say it is a 5-lane in the long term, in the regional transportation plan. But again, it's considered a vision project, way out there in terms of implementation.
We've got north-south kind of covered, especially if we decide to do a 5-lane, which I know it looks overwhelming, like people want 3, but I don't see that happening long term. I feel like you're gonna have to go 5, and there's some benefits to that too. Like if we do go 5, then we're gonna get more traffic through, which we already know we have a lot of through traffic through Nolensville. And if we wanna build up like our commercial tax base, like that's actually a benefit,
Mhm.
more traffic coming through. But I just see east-west is clearly missing here. Like we've got north-south kind of covered, and like we can do stuff with Nolensville Road, especially with the bypass. But I mean, we've got Concord going west, and that road, like you said, if you travel on it
Yeah.
at 8 a.m., it's so backed up. And same coming back into town, and then just the alignment of it's terrible as well. Like it doesn't even match up with Burkett, which is another terrible road to travel on. So going east, so I just don't like getting to an interstate, like especially going west to 65. Like you practically have one option,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a 3-lane.
Yeah.
And I think they did that purposefully. Like it was to keep it feeling kind of small and community, but it's not great for us because we're kind of in the center.
Yeah.
We don't have an interstate running through our town.
Right.
Like the best thing we could do is build north of that.
Okay. Sir?
Yes, question on the impact on the Bent Creek community. Looking at all the options there, it almost looks like you have to consider buying up townhouses or cottages there because they're gonna be right that close to that, any of those options, all 4 options. They're gonna be right, and the cemeteries on the other side, you go on the cemetery side, those townhouses there are gonna be hugely impacted. That's just my comment,
Yeah.
that would, are they gonna thinking that would be a buyout? Would the state look at it from that point of view, but maybe step it up?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes.
Yeah, short answer is yes, the short answer is yes, and it's probably the town is doing the buyout, not the state.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
Comment on that one. This has been in the NPP for such a long time, that line, like you said, 2006, is that what had appeared?
Yeah, 2005, yeah.
What gives these lines on a map any key? Because clearly those were built after 2006, and they're there. And now we're gonna have to go buy them out because I just don't understand.
Well, it wasn't that TDOT had the plan and then the town allowed them to be built. What happened when you go back and you find out exactly what timing happened, TDOT had a series of alternatives that they were beginning to propose. And at the same time that TDOT was trying to determine what was going to be their preferred alternative, the town had Bent Creek presentation come in. And the town was approving Bent Creek about the same time that TDOT was coming back and going, okay, we think this one is our preferred alternative. And so the town didn't know that that was the preferred alternative until after they had already approved Bent Creek.
Wouldn't that then behoove us to like make sure that this plan is solid before we get any additional like roads?
It is, and that's in fact, just last month, the BOC and actually Planning Commission as well quickly added a road into the existing major thoroughfare plan, which was basically idea number 2, the road coming up from Williams and around, just because we know that's a hotbed of development, and we need to ensure that we can demand they build the road where we need it to be built. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right.
To that, those roads cannot be just a line on the map. They have to be laid out to be reserved. The town has to say, this is where we want the road, not the area, but this is where we want it. That's what happened at Bend Creek. It was just a line on the map, but we had not adopted that line as where we wanted it. So Bend Creek went along, and, you know, nobody developed. It wasn't as if it was already in place, and then they built on top of it. It was just a thought that has not gotten solid yet. But if we have those lines solid where we want the roads, we want the improvements, then when development comes, we can reserve that space. Is that right?
That's right.
Correct.
That's right. There's a little bit of flexibility. You know, at this stage, it's hard to say, this is exactly where we want it, when maybe 100 yards over, there's now a development that is proposing something, and you go, well, you know what? If we wanted them to build that section, it would work. So it's not hard and fast. This is, you know, within, it is within probably 100 feet or so, a couple hundred feet.
One of the things that I don't think that you touched on real well is looking at the effect of a rotary or a roundabout, whichever way you want to do it. You know, if you look at the roundabout at McEwen and Concord Road, you come in there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon from McEwen, you're never going to get into that thing because the people coming from Concord Road will not let you merge. And even though in Tennessee, everybody is courteous and lets you merge and will use their turn signals and everything like that. The reality is, when the traffic's coming south on Nolensville Road, any attempt to make a right into a rotary, that's going to be a solid stream of traffic. And will, you know, make it works maybe on a smaller road, which is fine. But, you know, that works okay up east. But down here, people aren't used to that whole concept. And I can't imagine a dirt truck taking you on in the middle of a roundabout and yielding.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's the reality of Nolensville Road. It's major.
Yeah. No, and there are, you know, with all these, there are pros and cons, and we'll lay those out and discuss them with Victor and everyone else with the town. What was I going to say? I mean, you know, there are lots of good examples. Carmel, Indiana, if you've seen that, just, I think, completed what, their 150th or 175th roundabout. I mean, so, and not just from an operational but safety standpoint, there are arguments for it. So I'm not pitching one or the other. I'm just saying there are pros and cons. And I think what we would like to do is just go ahead and lay those out in a given location, whether it's, you know, here or wherever intersection, and then get direction from the town on which way to go.
People can't learn to drive them without practice, so you gotta show people can, and people can figure it out.
We could have a test track. Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't know, I mean, given whatever the access would be to that bypass
Uh-huh.
and the zoning around it, what's the risk of that becoming sort of a retail path? You know, I mean, because we're moving it away from the downtown.
Mhm.
You gotta come downtown to shop if you wanna do something. But if you're passing through, the downtown people don't have the benefit of the visibility. But you have the potential of creating a retail strip along this bypass. And I know it becomes zoning, there's a lot of issues, but what's the thought about the potential and the risk?
If you're looking at idea number 1, there's zero risk. Everything to the north of Clovercroft either sits in a floodplain or is already a residential type zone. So there's zero risk on that side of it. For south of Clovercroft, right now, that whole area is looking at developing. We're trying to figure out what it's going to be, and so we have the opportunity to ensure that whatever is built there, the road gets built the way that we want it to be built. So idea number 2, same thing with the issues to the north, really the same thing with the issues to the south. You know, flip over to the ideas 3 and 4. So when you start looking at the one-way pairs, that's where these might make sense in conjunction with one of the others, because those do have those potentials of, especially idea number 4 has the potential of helping to create some additional retail where now you've got this one-way pair that's helping you negotiate around the historic area, but it's also helping to make the historic area a bit more attractive and more things to do. So it's giving you some other opportunities just to get through, but also to reasons why you might want to stop. And both of those, maybe idea number 3 is a little bit less likely because it's more in the floodplain area than idea number 4.
Well, I said we were going to just do a brief presentation and then about 5 minutes of Q&A. Completely blew that. But we'd be happy to hang around a little more. And if you have questions or if you wanted to add any dots to any of those boards, love to do that. And then again, just to remind everyone, we do have the website and all this information is there, including the survey and the dot option. So if you want to just do it from the comfort of your home, please do that as well. But I guess we really want to thank you very much for coming out tonight. I know we're getting close to the Thanksgiving holiday, and wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. And we'll keep plugging away and gather information on the website, and then get all that back to Victor and his team.
About how much longer y'all think it's gonna take before you wrap it up with firm recommendations?
We're probably looking at wrapping up some recommendations by the end of December, I think is what we're shooting for. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.